100 years. That's how long physicists have known that their two best descriptions of reality, quantum mechanics and general relativity, can't both be right. 100 years of trying to unify them, and the fundamental problem has always been there's nothing to measure, no experiment you can design, no prediction specific enough to test. Until now, a team at TÜ just derived what they're calling the geodesic equation, a quantum version of Einstein's geodesic equation, and it does something no equation in this space has ever done before. It tells you where to look. It tells you how particles in quantum spacetime deviate from the paths that Einstein predicted, and those deviations get larger near black holes and neutron stars, which means the next generation of gravitational wave detectors might actually have a target. After a century of mathematical stalemate, fundamental physics just got a testable prediction. So let's talk a bit about what that means. Here's the landscape for today. Today's signal looks on the surface like it's scattered across completely different domains. You've got quantum gravity, Alzheimer's, iron powder, magnets behaving like graphene, AI stripping anonymity from the internet. But put them all in the same room and something comes into focus. Every single one of these stories is about resolution crossing a threshold, about something that was always there, always real, always operating, becoming visible for the first time. The geodesic equation didn't invent new physics. It found a mathematical lens that makes quantum gravitational deviations visible as predictions. Tanacytes have been sitting in the brain's third ventricle for as long as brains have existed, shuttling that toxic protein into the bloodstream. We just couldn't see them doing it until computational imaging and tissue analysis reached the necessary precision. Magnetic spin waves in patterned films have always obeyed the same mathematics as electrons in graphene. Nobody had run the computation to notice. And AI de-anonymization, same structure, applied to identity. The information people scattered across platforms like pet names, neighborhood references, and their daily routines was always there. It just took a system with enough pattern matching power to reassemble it into a coherent profile. So this is what the current moment actually looks like. It's not that we're reinventing or even inventing new realities. We're gaining the resolution to see what was already happening. And that resolution is arriving simultaneously across physics and neuroscience and material science and information systems. And it's not sequential, it's simultaneously, because the same computational and experimental acceleration is driving all of it. So the question this raises isn't what will we discover next? It's how much of reality has been operating in front of us at a resolution we couldn't access for all of human history, and what happens to a species that suddenly gets access to all of it at once. All right, let me go deeper on three things from today. First, we've got the brain's hidden defense system against Alzheimer's. Tanacytes. Most people have never even heard the word. Neuroscience barely paid attention to it. They're non-neuronal cells lining the third ventricle of the brain, and they were known to shuttle metabolic signals. That's about anyone thought they did. Vincent Previtt's team at INSERM just demonstrated that tanacytes actively transport toxic tau protein from cerebrospinal fluid into the bloodstream so it can be filtered out. So they move the bad stuff out. And when the researchers looked at brain tissue from Alzheimer's patients, those tanacytes were structurally fragmented. Their gene expression was altered in exactly the pathways responsible for this transport function. So the shuttle broke down. And when the shuttle breaks down, tau accumulates. Now, let's look at the pattern on this because it's extraordinary. On March 4th, UCLA and UCSF identified a protein complex, CRL5 SOCS4, that tags tau for destruction inside neurons. That's an intracellular defense. This tanacyte discovery is an extracellular clearance pathway, a completely different cell type, a completely different mechanism, both doing the same thing, removing the protein that causes the disease. And back on February 23rd, Washington University demonstrated a blood test that can predict Alzheimer's symptoms onset years in advance by measuring those plasma tau levels. So step back. What you're seeing is not one breakthrough. It's three distributed defense systems that the brain already possesses: intracellular tagging, extracellular clearance, and measurable blood biomarkers. all becoming visible within weeks of each other. So this therapeutic trajectory is shifting fundamentally away from trying to prevent tau from forming in the first place, which has failed in clinical trial after clinical trial, and toward restoring or amplifying the body's own infrastructure for removing it. The brain was never defenseless against neurodegeneration. It has systems designed for exactly this purpose. So the question is becoming, why do those systems fail? And can we repair them? And that's a different kind of medicine. It's not fighting the disease, it's restoring the organism. All right, second, iron powder as industrial fuel. Now, this one sounds almost absurd. You grind iron into a fine powder, you burn it, you collect the iron oxide, you reduce it back to iron using green hydrogen, and you burn it again. The carbon never enters the equation. Now, Rift, the Dutch startup behind this, just raised $131 million to build the first commercial system. The Dutch pension fund PGGM led the round. And they've already got 2 pilot units running in the Netherlands, and they're targeting 10 European industrial facilities by 2029. Now, here's what makes this significant beyond just novelty. Industrial heat accounts for more than a third of global energy-related carbon emissions. A third. It's been among the hardest sectors to decarbonize because factories need temperatures that conventional electrification can't easily reach. Now, Rift's system currently targets around 250 degrees Celsius, and that's the range for producing baby formula, paper, beer, plastic resins. So not glamorous stuff, but a lot of foundational stuff. And the chemistry isn't new. So metal powder combustion has been used in rocketry for decades. This innovation is in the engineering and economics of making it work at industrial scale. So Rift says they can deliver iron fuel at 140 euros per metric ton. Now, whether that's competitive depends on carbon pricing, gas price volatility, and the cost of green hydrogen. And all 3 of those, though, are moving in their favor. The war in Iran has driven European gas prices to nearly double what they were. Every geopolitical disruption makes the case stronger for fuel sources that cycle locally instead of flowing through exposed supply chains. But zoom out even further, and this sits alongside Form Energy's iron air grid batteries, Tata Steel's industrial heat batteries, the expansion of green hydrogen production across Europe. Each of these technologies addresses a different slice of the industrial heat problem. They're not replacing each other. They're filling out a mosaic, and they're reaching commercial viability simultaneously, not sequentially. And that compression, solutions that seemed implausible 5 years ago, all crossing this threshold at the same time, is the signature of generative acceleration applied to physical infrastructure. The extraction era built supply chains. The generative era builds cycles. All right, third, AI and the new shape of identity online. Researchers Simon Lerman and Daniel Peleka demonstrated something remarkable about how much structure exists in this publicly available data. Feed an LLM information from an anonymous social media account, and it will cross-reference pet names, neighborhood references, daily routines, and identify the real person behind the profile with high confidence. Now, that framing is worth sitting with. It sounds scary, but this requires, as they said, a fundamental reassessment of what can be considered private online. And that reassessment is already underway. Now, this study itself is part of that response. By publishing these capabilities openly, the research community is mapping the new terrain before it gets exploited silently, hopefully any more than it already has. Now, this paper documents specific scenarios, government surveillance, hyper-personalized scams, precisely so institutions can start designing the countermeasures. UCL computer scientist Peter Bentley flagged an equally important dimension of this. LLMs frequently make errors in linking the accounts, so the coevolutionary texture here is somewhat double-sided. These systems can resolve identities that were previously opaque, and they can construct false links with the same amount of confidence. Both capabilities demand new institutional design, and both are now visible enough to design around. But here's the structural observation. Every privacy framework currently in force was built around a world where assembling data fragments into an identity was hard. That assumption no longer holds. Edinburgh cybersecurity lecturer Mark Juarez pointed out that this extends beyond social media into hospital records, admissions data, statistical releases, domains where anonymization standards built for an earlier era are encountering tools that operate at a fundamentally different resolution. So what does privacy even become? It's not a state you achieve by scattering your information or trying to lock down your information. Privacy becomes something that has to be architecturally engineered into systems that account for what machines can now infer, not just what databases explicitly contain. And that design process is the structural story, and it's already begun. All right, let's look at the arcs of where everything today fits in the larger story. The tannocite discovery is the third major Alzheimer's mechanism revealed in 16 days. Back on March 4th, intracellular tau tagging. February 23rd, blood-based prediction. And now extracellular clearance. The scientific timeline compression arc has produced more actionable Alzheimer's findings in the first 9 days of March than the last several years have. And each one was invisible until computational research and resolution made it detectable. And that's the arc, not individual breakthroughs, but accelerating visibility. Now, on to privacy and identity. Today's de-anonymization research extends the arc we documented on March 4th when LLMs were shown to unmask pseudonymous users at scale. The structural observation is consistent. The definition of private is being renegotiated by capability, not by policy. So what's worth tracking is that the research community itself is leading this renegotiation, publishing attack vectors openly, documenting both the real and the false positive risks, forcing the design conversation before the capability gets weaponized quietly. The policy frameworks that emerge from this friction will look nothing like the ones they replace. They'll have to account for inference, not just access, and that's a fundamentally new design challenge, and the people best positioned to solve it are the ones surfacing it. On energy infrastructure, RIF's iron powder combustion is the 31st entry in the energy infrastructure build-out arc. It joins Occidental's geothermal drilling, Form Energy's iron-air batteries, Google XL's grid-scale storage, TerraPower's nuclear permit, and now a Japan-New Zealand hydrogen corridor announced, all recently, within the last few weeks. The diversification is the story. No single technology is going to just win here. The entire portfolio of alternatives reaches viability together, compressing the transition timeline in a way that no single solution ever could. All right, today's Human Voice segment is from Jason Silva. He gave a keynote back in February from Las Vegas titled Dancing on the Edge of the AI Abyss. Now, some of you might know him from his Hidden Brain series on TV. Now, I chose this because Silva does something that most commentators won't. He holds this exhilaration and vertigo kind of at the same time of the changes we're all going through. He describes AI as externalized imagination, systems that let anyone conjure worlds on demand. And then he leans into the anxiety a bit, honestly. Attention fragmenting, identity becoming fluid, institutions falling behind, a pervasive sense that nobody's steering this thing. So on a day when the signal includes century-old physics yielding testable predictions, hidden brain cells revealing defenses we never knew we had, and language models dissolving the concept of online anonymity, Silva's insistence that wonder and responsibility have to scale together feels exactly right. The raw data can't carry that emotional register, but we can. Go ahead and watch it. The link is in the newsletter. Okay, what actually shipped? So 3 new ones today. Luma AI released Una 1, the first image model that combines understanding and generation in a single auto-regressive architecture. It reasons through prompts during creation and breaks down complex instructions, planning scenes, and everything before generating them. It topped the Rise Bench logic benchmarks, narrowly beating both Nano Banana 2 and GPT Image 1.5. Now that's worth paying attention to. Image generation that actually thinks before it draws. Now, a team of researchers open sourced Cite Audit, a 5-agent system that detects hallucinated citations in academic papers, 97.2% accuracy, processes about 10 citations in 2.3 seconds. And there's a free web app at checkcitation.com. This matters because, of course, fake references have been slipping through the peer review at top AI conferences, and the commercial LLMs themselves can't reliably catch them. An open tool that can, now that's the ecosystem self-correcting. And AMD formally launched the Ryzen AI Embedded P100 series. That's 8 to 12 core processors built for on-device AI inference. So edge computing, embedded systems, the AI hardware build-out that continues to push inference closer to where the work actually happens. All right, I'll reiterate some new releases from late last week, but still worth knowing about. So OpenAI's Codex Security is in research preview, and that's an application for security agents that builds project-specific threat models and proposes context-aware patches. Anthropic and Mozilla published results from a 2-week engagement where Claude Opus 4.6 found 22 vulnerabilities in Firefox, 14 of them high severity, most now already fixed in Firefox 148. And Llama CPP merged an automatic parser generator into unified handling of reasoning, tool calling, and content parsing for local models. No recompilation needed. So here's the thread. This is what I want to leave you with. Today, a 100-year stalemate in fundamental physics produced its first testable prediction. A cell type nobody was paying attention to turned out to be the brain's own Alzheimer's defense system. Rocket chemistry got repurposed as carbon-free industrial fuel, and an LLM reassembled an anonymous identity from pet names and neighborhood descriptions. There's a thread connecting all of these. In each case, the information was already there. Physics, biology, scattered personal data. What changed is that our instruments, mathematical, computational, and artificial, reached a resolution to see them. We are becoming a species that can perceive what was always present, but invisible. And that's extraordinary. And it demands something of us because resolution doesn't come with a filter. It doesn't distinguish between a hidden tau clearance system and a hidden identity. It reveals everything at once. What we do with that resolution and what we design around it, what we protect and what we amplify, that is the work now. So very soon, watch for experimental proposals targeting the Q-desk equations predictions. When a gravitational wave observatory or a precision space mission designs an experiment specifically to test quantum deviations from Einstein's geodesics, that's the moment a century of theoretical impasse becomes an empirical research program. Physics will never look the same. We'll see you tomorrow.